Kicking off at number 5, the tomb of Antony and Cleopatra. Now, the legendary Roman politician and general Marcus Antonius, alongside his kindred spirit Cleopatra, may well be the most notorious lovers in the history of our civilization, and although mountains upon mountains of literature have been written about their star-crossed fate, the real mystery of Antony and Cleopatra came after they had both slipped from this mortal coil. Now, if you know anything about the Roman conquest of Egypt, you'll know that around 30 BC, Mark Antony and Cleopatra were not in the Romans' best books, and a general known as Octavian had waged a long and bloody campaign to bring Cleopatra's reign to an end, which he ultimately won, but sadly for us, that's where the trail runs cold, with no leads as to the two lovers' final resting place. One of the greatest unsolved mysteries in antiquity is the exact location of the final burial place of Antony and Cleopatra, but according to several ancient historians, Tonius and Plutarch to name a few, it was recorded that Octavian had permitted the two to be buried together, as their surviving children were taken back to Rome to be raised as Roman citizens. There are several leads that their tomb was located somewhere west of Alexandria, but numerous excavations throughout history have proven fruitless. However, they did come close, and between 2008 and 2009, reports of the prestigious Egyptologist Zahi Hawass having found evidence of their fated tomb came to light. Although no concrete evidence has been unearthed, relics and memorial coins of the lovers have been found in small ceremonial tombs, perhaps pointing toward Cleopatra's and Antony's tomb being somewhere in the vicinity. The excavation continues, but whoever stumbles upon the tomb of Antony and Cleopatra will unearth one of history's greatest mysteries. Next up at number 4, the Sack of Baltimore. And now, I love this particular entry, partly for its many layers and potential implications, but mainly for the fact that it's a swashbuckling tale of chaos and carnage that seemingly came out of nowhere. On June 20th, 1631, a small village named Baltimore in West Cork of Ireland was randomly and viciously attacked by pirates. Not just any pirates though, but pirates from the Barbary coast of North Africa, which at the time was synonymous with the Ottoman Empire. Now, if you couldn't tell, that's quite a distance. This incident would go down as the largest attack by Barbary pirates in both Ireland and Great Britain, and seemingly the target was a tiny village tucked in the corner of the Emerald Isle. So it posed the glaring question, why? Was it just a random chance of opportunity after the pirates had drifted off course? Perhaps, but it's not likely. See, the attack was led by a Dutch captain by the name of Jan Jansvoon van Haarlem, who had changed his name to Murad Rees the Younger, which, if you can't tell, is a bit of a curveball. But that curveball may have actually been thrown by someone else entirely. You see, despite being a small village, Baltimore was actually in the middle of a power play. At the time, it was under the control of a Gaelic chieftain, Sir Finian O'Driscoll, but the nearby English colony of Cork, led by a man named Sir Walter Coppinger, also had Baltimore in his sights. History is unclear as to who pulled which string, but all signs point toward the bizarre pirate attack being orchestrated by someone else entirely, in the hopes of seizing power away from O'Driscoll. In fact, several texts have even suggested that O'Driscoll's own relatives may have orchestrated the move, as they'd been exiled to Spain following defeat at the Battle of Kinsale. Whoever did it overestimated the bloodthirst of the Barbary pirates though, because following the raid, Baltimore was virtually deserted for several generations. The best laid plans of mice and men, yeah, you know what they say. Next up at number 3, the mystery of Oak Island. And whilst many of you will know this particular entry, there's no denying the fact that the eternal mystery that is Oak Island is worth mentioning every single damn time, and its inception is an event that has long evaded the unscrupulous eye of history. You know the story, right? In Nova Scotia, just off the coast of eastern Canada, lies a small island that has allegedly been the site of our civilization's greatest of treasures, although no one has ever been able to locate the exact point of where that treasure lies, causing countless individuals to fall into a wild obsession with unearthing its eternal mystery. In fact, the cause of Oak Island's mystery is down to the fact people have found treasure there, many of which have been carbon dated to several hundred years old, and the story of the Money Pit, a mysterious shaft that has been excavated countless times throughout history, which actually exists with actual structural records, has forced dozens of businesses to go bankrupt trying to solve its enigma. So here we are with our mystery Who the hell built this place? Now, there are hundreds of theories as to who would have constructed such an intricate place to conceal their treasure, the most popular being Captain William Kidd, the pirate that sailed to North America in the late 1600s, burying his plunder there so no one else could find it. Another theory states that the pit was constructed to house none other than Mary Antoinette's jewels, who after the Parisian uprising at the Palace of Versailles gave her treasures to a lady-in-waiting, who then fled France and ended up in Nova Scotia, where using her royal connections contracted the French Navy to construct the Oak Island pit, making sure that the incredibly rare jewels of her queen would never be discovered. And strangely enough, there has actually been credible evidence for this theory recently in 2017, when a 500-year-old brooch was discovered containing a huge garnet similar to that of which Mary Antoinette was reported to often wear. I mean, we could talk about all of these theories for an entire video, but as so far as unsolved events in history go, this one remains to be exactly that. Swinging in at number 2, the Yonaguni Monument. Okay, where do we even begin with this one? Because if you've seen any of our ancient mystery series, then this one definitely deserves its place amongst their ilk. But the event that we're possibly alluding to in the case of the Yonaguni Monument may be a geological enigma that predates known civilization itself, involving an entire continent submerging deep beneath the ocean. Yeah, and whilst that may sound like a massive leap, let's just take a look at the strange properties of the Yonaguni Monument before we jump to any kind of conclusions. Off the coast of Japan, submerged beneath the southernmost Ryukyu Islands, lie a formation of potentially man-made monoliths, which has led to decades of debate as to the true nature of this strange geological formation. The monument itself consists of very fine sandstone and mudstone, with its main feature being a rectangular formation measuring about 90 feet tall and consisting of several other strange formations that seemingly don't make sense as to how they have been naturally formed. Now, despite this massive debate between the Yonaguni Monument being natural or man-made, perhaps the most mind-blowing theory comes from the renowned geologist Robert Schoch of Boston University, who states that the Yonaguni Monument is indeed most likely a natural formation, possibly used and modified by humans in the past before seemingly sliding away to the murky depths of the ocean during a geological event that occurred in ancient history. On the flip side, the geologist that discovered the monument, Masaki Kimura, claimed that the structure was undoubtedly artificial, created by an ancient civilization at least 10,000 years ago, accurately carved and created before sliding into the ocean following unknown tectonic activity. Kimura also goes on to say that not only that, but he can also identify a nearby pyramid, castles, entire roads, other monuments, an entire stadium at the bottom of the ocean. Yeah, this one is quite something. What do you guys think? Let me know. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, the creation of Baalbek. Because, holy moly, if this one isn't one of the most mysterious unsolved events in history, I'm not entirely sure what is. Who the hell built Baalbek in Lebanon, the most mysterious ruins of the entire Roman Empire, a monumental, supposedly 2,000-year-old temple to the god Jupiter that sits atop 3 separate 1,000-ton stone blocks? To put it into perspective, the monoliths at Stonehenge weigh about 1/40th of that. Yeah, you heard that correctly. 1,000-ton stone blocks. And despite being the diligent record keepers that they were, there is no record of who ordered this temple to be built, how these monolithic stones were cut, why they were cut, or how they even came to be, and how the temple itself came to be abandoned, because for the most part, whoever built Baalbek just up and left. Now, there are many mythological and cultural legends as to the origins of Baalbek. Some say that Cain built it to hide away from the wrath of God. Others say that giants built it at the command of Nimrod, which would eventually become the Tower of Babel. In fact, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, some claim that the intergalactic landing pad alluded to in its tale was in itself Baalbek, a site constructed purely for the reception of ancient astronauts. In fact, though, the actual mystery of Baalbek resides more within its geographical location. What was the point in cutting such enormous rocks out in the middle of nowhere? Why was this temple even built where it was? And why would the Romans go to such great lengths to create a structure that wasn't efficient in location instead of next to a major city or a port? The Romans weren't exactly known for doing things without efficiency and purpose. That's what made them so successful, after all. In fact, Baalbek seems so out of character to have been built by the Romans that many scholars completely eschew any historical historical engineering correlation with them and simply state that the Romans never built Baalbek but discovered it and then added their iconic pillars to Jupiter and repurposed the ruins as their own kind of temple. Yeah, I'm stumped, guys. The construction of Baalbek, who made it, when they did, how they did it, and why they did it remains to be one of the most mysterious events in history.
In at 5, the Chase family vault. The first account of the Chase family vault incident was published in 1883 in James Edwards Alexander's Transatlantic Sketches. According to the writer, Mrs. Goddard was buried in the vault in 1807, followed by Anne-Marie Chase in 1808 and later Dorcas Chase in 1812. However, following the death of Thomas Chase, the vault was once again opened. But what was discovered baffled everyone. The caskets of the Chase girls were said to have been disturbed, having been tossed from the place, left in a very confused state. A similar incident was found to have occurred upon opening the vault for 2 burials in 1816 and 1819. It had been stated, I quote, "Each time that the vault was opened, the coffins were replaced in their proper situations, that is, 3 on the ground side by side and the others laid on them. The vault was regularly closed. The door, a massive stone which required 6 or 7 men to move, was cemented by masons, and though the floor was sand, there were no marks of footsteps or water. The last time the vault was opened was in 1819. Lord Combermere was then present, and the coffins were found confusedly thrown about the vault, some with their heads down and others up. What could have occasioned this phenomenon? In no other vault in the island has this ever occurred. Was it an earthquake which occasioned it, or the effects of an inundation in the vault?" End quote. What are your theories? Were the spirits of the Chase family not yet at peace, lingering within the sealed off vault, desperately seeking to escape? Or was something less sinister at play? An earthquake? A very strong jokester? No one will ever know. In at 4, Jeffrey Daniels. On November 10th, 1997, a man in his late 30s checked into a Super 8 motel in Aiken, South Carolina. He paid in cash but left no name, stating to the staff that he wanted to leave all that behind. That night he ordered food, but when it arrived he did not answer the door, and a do not disturb sign was seen hanging on his door with a handwritten note that read, "I am not responsible for the consequences." 3 days later his body was found. He had committed suicide. However, his method of death had never been released to the public, which has posed many questions. No identification was discovered at the scene, only 2 bottles of antidepressants. However, their labels were removed. Upon investigation, it was discovered that the mystery man had stayed at a number of local hospitals following a handful of failed suicide attempts. The only name he gave? Jeffrey Daniels. He supplied a social security number and a New York address, however both were fake. The mystery man's true identity was never discovered, or why he so desperately sought to remove his existence and leave behind all evidence of his life.
Coming up next at number 3, St. John's Dance. And you may have heard mention of this one before, but perhaps not in this context. You see, it's important that we note that in modern times, St. John's Dance or St. Vitus's Dance is a terrible disease also known as Sydenham's chorea that affects the nervous system and results in a series of hysterical jerking movements of the limbs often exhibited in young children. Generally speaking, it isn't infectious, but that doesn't figure to explain the countless records of mass hysterical dancing that occurred throughout history, of literally thousands of people across Europe being afflicted by a manic need to dance. The earliest known outbreak occurred in the 7th century and was primarily thought to occur during times of intense hardship, particularly affecting the peasant and working classes. So what? You're a peasant in Dark Age Europe and all of a sudden you just start dancing and can't stop, somehow infecting the rest of your village, town or city until there's a horde of people doing the exact same thing, potentially collapsing from exhaustion or dying from a heart attack. Well, yeah, because that's exactly what happened. One of the most well-documented cases was in 1518 in the Austrian city of Strasbourg, where a woman named Frau Troffia began dancing in the streets, and within a month 400 people had joined her. Yeah, she danced for a month and loads of people died. Now there are many theories on the true explanation of St. John's Dance, and scholars still argue as to whether it truly was a real contagious disease or merely a social phenomenon. One of those theories suggests a particular fungi had infected their crops, and another suggests that it was all a misunderstanding and St. John's Dance was actually the practice of some secretive European cult. Yeah. Beats me, guys. Swinging in at number 2, the remains of Richard III. And this one, strangely enough, is the perfect blend of ancient mystery and potentially contemporary unexplainable intrigue. Because that's exactly what you all came for, right? Also, I mean, this one is already pretty much solved, but it's in the details where its mystery truly shines. We all know Richard III, right? A horse, my kingdom for a horse. But well, apparently this woman, Scottish author and historian Philippa Langley, knew him a little bit better than anyone else did. Now, it's important to note that history had long forgotten the final resting place of Richard III, the last Plantagenet king of England, and after his defeat at the Battle of Bosworth, his remains were scattered to the winds of history. After all, history is written by the winners. Well, let's fast forward to modern times when in September 2012, Philippa Langley led an excavation of a car park in Leicester city centre. A few signs pointed toward it potentially being the ruined remains of Greyfriars Church, but in the words of Langley, she had a strange feeling, one that she couldn't quite place, and something was telling her that Richard III was buried beneath that very car park. Now, the dig team was on a very tight budget and only had one chance at excavating a tiny portion of the car park. And guess what? The exact place that Philippa Langley had a strange feeling about turned out to be the final resting place of Richard III's remains. And not only that, but the parking space that he was buried beneath was marked with a large painted R on the tarmac, used to signify a reserved parking space. I mean, all of this can be explained away, right? Eventually someone would have found the remains of the dead king, but you can't deny the fact that the strange cosmic coincidence that led Langley to his final resting place is much more mysterious than a dead English king in a car park. And finally, coming in at a #1 spot, the Tunguska Event. And I absolutely love this entry for its cosmic significance alone and the potential warning sign that we should all be very wary of. Let's head on over to remote Siberia, where on the bright summer morning of the 30th of June 1908, a massive impact explosion, the likes of which has never before been seen in human history, completely flattened a remote area of the Siberian wilderness, covering over 2,000 square kilometers of isolated forest. As far as we know, no one was caught in the blast, but if they were, they would have certainly been obliterated by a shockwave 1,000 times greater than that of the Hiroshima atomic bomb. The Tunguska explosion completely flattened over 80 million trees in its blast radius, rupturing their roots like grass to a lawnmower. 50 or so miles away, those native to the region were knocked flat on their feet by the blast, windows shattered and buildings subsided. For all intents and purposes, it was the result of an unimaginable power. And if Tunguska had occurred over a metropolitan area, an entire city would have likely been flattened. So, what was it? Well, the leading scientific consensus is that the explosion of the Tunguska event was caused by the impact of a small asteroid, one that had possibly burned up in Earth's atmosphere and then produced a shockwave that resulted in the aforementioned cataclysm. However, not everyone buys that hypothesis, and many other researchers and scientists have proposed the Tunguska event being the result of a leak of natural gas from deep within the Earth's crust that became ignited by a storm and resulted in the Tunguska hellfire. Most evidence though points towards Tunguska being the result of an asteroid, albeit one that luckily somehow missed the vast majority of our entire populated planet. It's also important to note that researchers believe Tunguska to be the result of a small asteroid, which is a terrifying thought in itself. It poses an incredibly important question: how would our history have been shaped if the Tunguska event occurred somewhere else? What if its intended target had changed? And more importantly, are we prepared if it ever happens again?
Number 5. The Pyramids and the Sphinx. Famed for giving out riddles to passers-by and would-be kings and keeping even more secrets for itself, the Sphinx and the Great Pyramids of Giza aren't just one of the best tourist destinations in the world, they're a source of never-ending speculation. Were they crafted by aliens? Are there hidden secrets lying within the Sphinx that we don't know about? Almost certainly. Let's dissect them a bit. So the Sphinx, if you haven't heard of it, this is your first time hearing about it. It's one of the 7 wonders of the world or something, but this might be the first time. It's a massive limestone statue with a lion's body, and let's be real, it's a nice one at that. And the head of a human. Was it always a human's face? There's some speculation and discussion about that. Some researchers have proposed that originally the Sphinx was a monument to the jackal god Anubis, and that his face was refitted at some point in the image of Amenhotep II, a pharaoh from around that era. Now, the purpose and origin remains a point of contention to Egyptologists. What was the Sphinx built for? Is it a tomb? A monument? Just something to take photos of? Some people have even speculated that the Sphinx is older than Egypt even. A tomb? A monument? Just something to do? Researchers too have speculated that perhaps the Sphinx is older than Egypt even. Erosion pattern on the Sphinx's body appear consistent with water erosion rather than wind erosion, raising all sorts of questions about the climate and geological history. Did Egypt used to be like a lot wetter? And that's just what puzzles people on the outside. The inside of the thing is a whole other can of worms. Some propose that there are unexplored passages or secret chambers containing wondrous treasures, ancient texts, sacred artifacts, artifacts. I think the Master Sword might even be in there. Some people think there's proof of extraterrestrial life. It's a very widespread conspiracy theory that aliens were involved in the Sphinx and the pyramids and are very closely tied to ancient Egyptian culture. Some limited excavations around the Sphinx have been carried out, but because of the delicate nature of the monument, further digging is a bit challenging. You don't want to be the guy who ruined one of the 7 wonders of the world. They're gonna make fun of you forever if that happens. We could do a whole video on the mysteries behind the Sphinx, and I sincerely hope we do, because we are just scratching the surface of strange stuff going on there. But if you're looking for way more strange stuff, then you already know we have that in spades. We've got just about everything freaky you can think of. We've done a video or 2 on it. So hit subscribe. Please hit that little bell as well so you make sure to get our videos up to date. Don't miss a single scream, but do that at the end of this video because I got 4 more unsolved mysteries for you coming up right now. Number 4, the Voic Manuscript. The manuscript is one of my personal favorite unsolved mysteries out there just for how sheer little we know about it. We have nothing. It's kind of a choose your own adventure for mysteries. Is it aliens? Demons? A really convoluted historical prank? If you don't know, the Voic Manuscript is a strange document written in a handwritten text filled with bizarre illustrations. No one's been able to make sense of it, primarily because it's written in a language that has never been seen elsewhere in human history. It was named after Wilfrid Voynich, the Polish antiquarian who purchased it in 1912, although its ownership has passed through many hands. So what was it written for, and by who? These are the questions we've been asking, and we're probably going to keep asking over and over. The manuscript is about 240 pages, containing illustrations of plants, astronomical diagrams, humanoid figures, and other strange objects. Despite countless attempts by cryptographers, no one's been able to crack the code just yet. Some speculation has been made that it could be a biology textbook in an encoded language. Some people think it could be the scrawlings of a brilliant alchemist, magic and spell casting we couldn't possibly hope to understand. Some say it's from a forgotten civilization, while others have said maybe it's all just a load of nonsense and is just made by someone who had too much time on their hands and a vengeance against historians who wanted to prank them for centuries. The book is thought to have come from anywhere between the 15th century and the 17th century. We don't even know when this thing was written. Like I said, we know next to nothing about it. Now, if you're feeling clever and inspired, you can find a PDF of the Voic Manuscript as a free download pretty easily. Who knows? You might be the one to finally crack this case. But hey, don't be frustrated if you end up falling down a conspiracy rabbit hole many before you have tried. I looked through a few of these pages and it took me 30 seconds before I was looking like Charlie from Always Sunny at the conspiracy wall, all that red tape and stuff.
In at 3, Kenny Veach. On November 10, 2014, a hiker by the name of Kenny Veach disappeared overnight in the mountains of Nevada, and since then, his disappearance has remained a complete mystery to the public and even those that knew him. Prior to his disappearance, Veach commented on a YouTube video, claiming to have found a cave in the area of Nellis Air Force Base. He wrote, "I am a long-distance hiker. One time during one of my hikes out by Nellis Air Force Base, I found a hidden cave. The entrance to the cave was shaped like a perfect capital M. I always enter every cave I find, but as I began to enter this particular cave, my whole body began to vibrate. The closer I got to the cave entrance, the worse the vibrating became. Suddenly I became very scared and hightailed it out there. That was one of the strangest things that ever happened to me." Veach had stated that he would return to the cave, bringing with him a camera and a weapon, and that he did. He posted a video on YouTube showing the hiker looking inside. However, for those hoping to hunt it down themselves, it is almost near impossible considering the vastness of the desert. The events following the video are a complete mystery. All we know is that Veach returned 6 months later, but he was never seen or heard from again. We can only speculate. Was there something more supernatural occurring within the cave, causing the unexplained vibrations? Did he get lost upon his return? But considering his hiking experience, it is doubtful. Did he commit suicide? All we know is that a search party was conducted and his cell phone found near an abandoned mine shaft, yet no body, clothes, or other belongings were ever located. In at 2, Eilean Mor Lighthouse Keepers. Eilean Mor is a remote island located within the Flannan Islands. It is completely uninhabited, aside from one lighthouse that once housed a group of keepers whose unexplained disappearances left the world stunned. The island has always sparked interest in people due to the supernatural superstition surrounding it. The islands were named after Saint Flannan, a 6th century Irish bishop who built a small chapel on the island in hopes to deter the spirits he believed haunt the isolated spot. Now on the 26th of December 1900, a small vessel was making its way towards the Flannan Islands. Its destination, Eilean Mor. The vessel was carrying Captain James Harvey and a replacement lighthouse keeper, Joseph Moore. As the vessel drew closer to the island, the pair were surprised to find that no one was there to greet them. They even sent up a warning flare to attract their attention. However, there was no response. As they made their way up to the lighthouse, they immediately noticed something was awry. The door was unlocked, coats missing, and chairs were overturned, as though someone had left in quite the hurry. The island was searched, but no one was ever found, except for a lighthouse log belonging to Thomas Marshall. The last entry was on December 12th. He wrote of severe winds, like a which had never been seen in 20 years. He also noted that one of the keepers had been very quiet and the other crying. What makes this log entry particularly peculiar is that there were never any reports of a storm hitting the island. In fact, the weather was calm. Eventually more clues were found. Ropes hewn over rocks which held a brown crate. Perhaps the keepers were attempting to retrieve supplies before a wave washed them all out to sea. I guess we'll never know. And finally, in at number 1, Alisa Lam. Arguably the most infamous unsolved mystery floating around on YouTube, many internet dwellers have attempted to solve this unexplainable death of a young Canadian girl at the Cecil Hotel, but none have been able to crack it, and I doubt they ever will. On February 19, 2013, the body of Alisa Lam was discovered atop the infamous hotel in downtown Los Angeles, floating in the building's water tank, completely naked. Prior to the grisly discovery, Lam had been reported missing at the beginning of the month, and her body was only located after tenants had reported issues with the water supply in the hotel. The root cause? Lam's deceased body floating within it. The discovery was truly horrifying, and the way in which her body was found has left more questions than answers. However, it's not the most disturbing thing that emerged out of this bizarre case. A CCTV video began to float around YouTube of Lam's final moments, which featured her in a frenzied state inside of the hotel elevator. In the disturbing video, Lam can be seen hitting a number of different buttons on the elevator panel, yet the door was never closed. Whether down to a malfunction or something more sinister, Lam's behavior is what sparks the most intrigue. She stands in the corner, almost hiding out of sight from whoever or whatever is on the other side of the doors. She then steps out before quickly stepping back in again, and then eventually leaves the elevator entirely. Now, many theorists on the internet have noted that a shadow that does not belong to Lam can be seen outside of the elevator doors. Personally, I haven't spotted anything, but that doesn't mean that she was completely alone. Now, back to the discovery of her body. Once retrieved from the water tank, it appeared to have decomposed and was bloated, showing hints of green and even marbling on the abdomen. However, there were no signs of foul play or suicide, which left medical professionals completely baffled. I don't think we'll ever know what truly happened to Alisa Lam, but what do you guys think?
Number 5. The Ghost Bride of Galvez. To Texans, it's no secret that Hotel Galvez is haunted. The Grand Galvez, as it's known now, first opened its doors in 1911, and since then has been said to be home to all manner of haunting, but the most retold story is that of Audra, the Ghost Bride of Galvez. Audra was a 25-year-old bride-to-be getting married there. Her betrothed was a young sailor who would frequently leave her on her lonesome while he was out on a voyage. During the periods where the sea would separate the two lovers, Audra would rent out room 501, climb out the ladder to the rooftop, and wait on the rooftop turret with love in her heart for her sweetheart to return. Now, one day during a catastrophic storm, Audra was told that her fiance's ship capsized, and overcome with grief, Audra took her own life on the roof of the hotel. Tragically, as if this wasn't sad enough, her groom would arrive a few days later, eager to surprise and re-encounter his bride as he'd survived the capsizing. And although he was never able to be with her physically again, if you believe the stories, she might still linger around the premises. Visitors claim that Audra frequents the 5th floor, and in particular, her spirit tends to hang around the matrimonial suite and room 501. Some claim they hear random doors slamming, or strong currents of chills, flickering lights, the usual who's who of a ghost haunting a hotel. Other stories tell of seeing a candle lit on the rooftop, wondering if it's the ghost of Audra still waiting for her beloved to come back to her. The attendants at the Galvez claim that there's difficulties making electronic keys for room 501 since they're prone to malfunction frequently. Visitors to the Galvez go out specifically looking for Audra now, hoping to catch a glimpse of the spirit. If you ever go to Texas, be sure to check it out if you're brave enough. And if you're looking for more freaky stories, true crime, ghosts, cryptids, basically the whole 9 yards, Top 5 Scary has all of that and then some. So click on that bell and click on through and subscribe and find something to scream at. But do that at the end of this video, okay? We got way more mysteries in Texas coming up. Number 4. The Ice Boox Killer. The Ice Boox Killer refers to an incredibly grisly crime that haunted Houston, and if you believe the conspiracies, might be entangled in a much larger web of interest. Take a listen to this brutal crime. On June 23, 1965, 2 Houston police officers were sent for a fairly benign wellness check and went to investigate the home of a suburban family, the Rogers, Fred and Edwina, and their son Charles. Edwina's nephew was concerned because he hadn't seen or heard from his aunt in a concerning amount of time. The 2 officers went to check the house and got no response from a knock. A look around in the backyard, they found a makeshift barricade on the back door, which was more than a little suspicious, so they entered the house. One of the 2 detectives opened the fridge instinctively and saw a pile of raw meat in the fridge. The detective dismissed it as boar or pig, and you can probably see where this is going. They opened the vegetable crisper and were disgusted at what they found: the heads of Edwina and Fred Rogers. Police suspected initially that the son Charles had been behind it, but why? No one was particularly sure. Now, here's where this already upsetting strange case gets wild. There are allegations that Charles Rogers was present the day of the JFK assassination, and some allege he was one of the 3 tramps photographed with police escort by Dealey Plaza. The conspiracy alleges that Charles Rogers, who was a former Marine and served in the Office of Naval Intelligence, was involved somehow in the larger assassination plot, and the claim is that somehow his parents discovered his involvement with the conspiracy and he had to silence them and flee. A bold claim, but Charles Rogers was never found. No proof of a body, despite being declared dead. Now, did he vanish? Or was he himself silenced to tie up a loose knot as part of something infinitely larger than himself? We may never truly have the answers for this one. Number 3. The Yonaguni Monument. You've heard of the lost city of Atlantis. Surely. Of course you have. It's one of the best Disney movies you forgot about. That's a story for a whole other video. Well, what if it wasn't the only lost underwater city out there? Have you ever heard of the Yonaguni Monument? The Yonaguni Monument has sometimes been called Japan's Atlantis, and it refers to a strange, eerie underwater rock formation just off the coast of Yonaguni Island in Japan that has had people scratching their heads for years. It's a massive structure consisting of several flat rock slabs arranged in a way that seems like an intelligent life put it together. Now, some people say that this structure could be completely natural, resulting from years of erosion and tectonic activity. Certainly, stranger things have happened, and it wouldn't be completely impossible for something to form this way, but the way it exists now, the way it sits, it seems deliberately carved out, and it seems like it was an important structure to someone. Perhaps a monument, a temple, some sign of a lost city, hence the Atlantis comparisons. Is it possible this was evidence of a lost civilization buried beneath the ocean waves, forever forgotten to history? The monument being completely submerged has been fuel for the fire of speculation. Was it always underwater? Did it end up there over time? Did the water raise around it? Did the land used to look significantly different? It makes it pretty difficult to study as well, making it just that little bit more elusive, as if it wasn't mysterious enough as is. But let's be real, it was probably aliens. It was almost certainly aliens. Number 2, the Bermuda Triangle. The Bermuda Triangle. Now there's an exquisite ancient mystery, one of the certified classics, something that's eluded us for years and will probably continue to do so. It's been referred to before as the Devil's Triangle, and it's host to all manner of mysterious incidents and unexplained phenomena. One of the more infamous incidents linked to the Bermuda Triangle is the disappearance of Flight 19 in December 1945. 5 Navy bombers vanished during a routine training mission alongside 14 crew members. Gone. Zilch. There was an extensive search effort, but nothing was ever found. Not so much as a bolt off the hull, a boot fished up, a hat, nothing. It was as if they were swallowed up by the void. Naturally, people went a bit wild with theories on this one. Anything from aliens, electromagnetic anomalies, alternate realities, no clipping into the back room. You know, pretty serious academic stuff. But it's bizarre. Another particularly good Bermuda baffler for you is the case of the USS Cyclops. In March 1918, the 542-foot-long cargo ship carrying over 300 crew members vanished during its voyage from Barbados. No wreckage, no survivors ever found. Certainly you would think a ship that big with that many people would leave behind a little bit of evidence, right? What happened? Were they swallowed up by the very seas themselves, pulled to Davy Jones's locker by the Kraken? Or are they somewhere we can't reach them, in a place between worlds and time? The region is known for all sorts of weird stuff too, involving electronic malfunctions and compass deviations. It makes it seem like there is just something bad bad in the air out there? Maybe just bad vibes? Certainly seems that way. And number 1, the Dorset Mass Grave. Oh, this one is a doozy, and it is one of the scariest and most confusing archaeological discoveries ever found. Let me ask you, what's more fun than a barrel of monkeys? A barrel of Vikings? Well, how about a mass grave full of headless Viking bodies? No? Well, you and I find different things fun, I suppose. Way back in the yesteryear of 2008, a group of archaeologists were on a fairly routine digging operation in Dorset, a quaint little seaside town in England. They were supervising a digging operation to improve local roads and were on set to see if there was anything of note to find, you know, if they came across an old coin or an old arrowhead or something you could stuff in a museum case. For the first few days of the job, there wasn't anything particularly noteworthy discovered until they came across the mass pile of 54 entangled Viking corpses, all missing their heads. I guess they thought that was probably kind of interesting. If it was just a bunch of headless Viking bodies, that'd be one thing. But the mass grave was wrapped in confusing details. Their skulls were missing, but as well their rib cages, arms, and leg bones were all scattered around, this is disgusting, surrounded by discarded teeth. No clothes or weaponry was recovered. So what in the Allfather's name happened here? Because absolutely nothing I can imagine is pleasant. Sounds like Vikings opened up a portal to hell, went really wild with it. The teeth found around the grave had all been filed down neatly, which is very interesting. Now, it goes without saying that Viking dental surgery could not have been painless, meaning the process had to be excruciating, suggesting it was either done by a very careful tormentor or done to themselves to intimidate their opponents to show just how gritty they are. I actually don't know which of those two are preferable. They actually both sound pretty horrible. Now, as good as my theory about a bunch of Vikings opening up a portal to hell and being offered as a sacrifice is, archaeologists had some different ideas. They theorized that by looking at the wound patterns on the ribs and torso, they were surgical precise blows, which wasn't really the kind of thing you'd expect from a rabid Viking warrior flailing around a sword in a brawl. The archaeologists thought that these men were either offered up as part of a horrifyingly sadistic ritual, or it was a big time mass sentencing where everybody was sentenced to the death. Explains too where all the weapons and gear had gone. These men had been brought here from somewhere else and then left here for a long time. We might never know the truth behind the Dorset mass grave, and I'm gonna be honest, that might be fine with me. Some secrets are better left buried. Anyone else feel though that all those Viking skeletons, that might be like the world's most terrifying puzzle to put all that together? Morbid thought, and that's something to end the video on.
And at number 5, the Bowmont Children. Starting off our list is a mystery from Australia back in 1966. The disappearance of the Bowmont Children is a mystery that has left people scratching their heads for decades now. 3 siblings aged 9, 7, and 4 years old disappeared from a beach in South Australia on Australia Day. According to witnesses, the last sighting of the children on the beach had been in the company of a tall, blonde, tan, athletic man with a thin face in his mid-30s. But the children and this suspect were never found, and bodies were never located. Since the beach was a short ways away from their home, their parents believed that the eldest sibling, Jane, would be capable of looking after her younger siblings, and the 3 of them would return home by noon as were instructed. This was a common occurrence for them, and because of the times back then, parents didn't worry about their children being harmed or abducted by strangers. When their father returned home from work at 3 p.m., the children were still not back, so he drove down to the beach, but was unable to locate them. Police quickly organized a search, with everyone hoping that the children had just simply lost track of time. Within 24 hours of the search, the missing children became known nationwide. The tall blonde man that the witnesses had described seeing the children with seemed odd to the parents, considering their children were often quite shy, and reports say that they were quite relaxed with him. It is suspected that perhaps the suspect had met with the children on the beach on multiple occasions, gaining their trust. There were a few other sightings too, with the children reportedly being sighted walking home alone around 3 p.m. To this day, the case has yet to be solved, and in 2016 and 2018 there were leads that police explored, although it turned out that they were dead ends. This case is often credited with a shift in Australian lifestyles, with parents beginning to fear that their children were no longer safe when unsupervised in public. From missing children to serial killers, in at number 4 is Jack the Ripper. The Jack the Ripper case is perhaps the biggest unsolved serial killer case in the world, which over time has often found its way into contemporary horror stories and media media and pop culture. In case you're not familiar with who Jack the Ripper is, back in 1888 in the London district of Whitechapel, a serial killer became known as Jack the Ripper terrorized the poverty-stricken area. His victims were typically women working as prostitutes, who had their throats cut prior to receiving abdominal mutilation, in which their internal organs were tampered with or removed. Because of this last bit of evidence, it was commonly believed that Jack the Ripper had some sort of knowledge or experience with the human anatomy and surgical practices. During the course of the killings, media outlets received letters allegedly from the killer, one of which referred to themselves as Jack the Ripper, which is where the name came from, despite the belief that most of these letters were a hoax, minus the infamous From Hell letter that came alongside half a preserved human kidney, reportedly taken from one of the victims. There are an unknown number of killings by Jack, although 5 specifically found between August 31st and November 9th of 1888 are considered to be canon killings, because the evidence linked them all. The murders were never solved, and to this day Jack the Ripper still captivates the public's interest.
Number 3. UFO Sighting. In December 29, 1980, Betty Cash saw something on the outskirts of Houston near Dayton that would change the course of her life forever, as she made a close encounter of the third kind. She was driving her friend Vicki Landrum and Landrum's grandson home one night at 9 p.m. when the three of them noticed a bright light in the sky. Betty Cash described it like this: "We didn't know what it was, but we knew there was something that was lighting up the sky. We all began to feel heat, and all of a sudden Vicki screamed for me to stop. When I stopped, I went forward and her handprint was embedded in the dash of the car, and I thought, well, I've got to see what this is. So I got out, I walked towards the front of the car, and I stood there looking up, trying to figure out what this object was. Then a diamond-shaped object appeared with flames shooting out. The heat was tremendous. When I reached for the door handle, the door was so hot I couldn't even begin to open it. The only thing I was thinking was, are we gonna get out of here alive? And then seemingly as soon as it appeared, it disappeared, and Landrum stated that moments later, a large squadron of black helicopters soared over the area. After the choppers cleared, Betty took the Landrums home and retired for the night. The next morning, however, Cash said she was extremely sick, suffering from nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, weakness, and an intense burning in her eyes. Now here's where things get curious. Landrum and her grandson all reported the exact same symptoms. Over the next few days, Cash said her symptoms worsened so much, with large blisters forming on her skin, she eventually had to be taken to a hospital where she was treated for radiation poisoning, and she lost large patches of skin and clumps of hair. To date, there has never been a conclusive answer to what happened to Cash and Landrum. The US government denied any involvement and said they don't have any diamond-shaped crafts like that in their fleet, and it wasn't from their government. Was the military testing new technology on unsuspecting victims? Was it a craft from another world touching down for a moment? There are so few answers and so many questions for this unsolved mystery. Number 2. The Death Fields. There is a stretch of I-45 highway between Houston and Galveston that is notorious to locals due to the string of violent, horrific crimes that have all occurred there since the 1970s. Since the first body was discovered, it's been thought that anywhere from 33 bodies have been discovered there, and the truly horrifying thing is how little police and authorities seem to have on this case. Initially, detectives believed that this work was that of a serial killer, due to the sheer number of bodies being found in the area, but over time some have wondered if it could be multiple criminals. Most of the victims have been young women, typically around college ages. The FBI has said that the agency's behavioral experts have created a profile of a possible killer, but there are no known witnesses to any of the crimes and no common person to connect them all. An official statement that was given by the FBI said that the signs point to one killer, although multiple killers can't be ruled out. Given the nature of the area where the bodies were found, it was likely someone with roots in the area, someone who would have known these fields were a good place to hide a body. In 1998, a man named Edward Howard Bell was arrested and claimed to have been involved in the deaths of 11 girls in Galveston County. And although he was a suspect in the aforementioned I-45 case, police unfortunately didn't have enough evidence to tie him to those larger crimes. Only one death on the I-45 was ever convicted, when Louisiana police arrested Kevin Edison Smith in 2009 on a completely unrelated charge. A DNA test found that it matched the body of a girl who had disappeared from Texas in 1996 and whose body was tragically found on the I-45. From this confession and conviction from two different criminals, it's suspected that multiple people were involved in these grisly crimes. Hopefully one day this case can be closed for good and the I-45 1945 can go back to just being a highway. And number 1, the servant girl Annihilator. Perhaps one of the most infamous criminals to ever live in Austin, and to this day is still anonymous and possibly will forever. The servant girl Annihilator, absolutely brutally named, I cannot believe they called him that, was a serial killer who preyed on young women in Austin between 1884 and 85. He is thought by some to be America's first serial killer, hardly a badge of honor if you ask me. He attacked wantonly, and despite his name, he was not exclusively targeting women. He fatally attacked 7 women, 1 man, and additionally seriously injured 6 women and 2 men. All of his victims he would attack indoors while asleep and then would finish the job outside, leaving them to be found. His victims were all posed in similar manners and were all found with a sharp object inserted into their ears. Texan lawman started a manhunt for the criminal, arresting 400 men in the year of 85 in a desperate attempt for any leads on who was terrorizing the community. Interestingly, the top theory of elected officials at the time is that the servant girl Annihilator couldn't possibly have been committing all of these crimes by himself as one lone deranged criminal, but rather an identity shared by a group of men carrying out heinous acts all together. Now, in the end, no one was ever successfully accused of being the servant girl Annihilator. And what happened to him was additional police patrols and civilian militias around Austin ended up scaring the Annihilator off. Or so you think. A theory, although an outlandish one, is that the servant girl Annihilator would move to London to continue his crimes, as 3 years later, the Whitechapel killings would start and Jack the Ripper would terrorize the streets of London, leading to some people suspecting that maybe these 2 lunatics were connected in a way. Think about that, a globe-trotting serial killer wasn't content with just one, had to move, get 2 different scary nicknames. Imagine if both your nicknames were servant girl Annihilator and Jack the Ripper. A little much for one guy, if you ask me.
Kicking off at number 5, the Dyatlov Pass incident, which is perhaps one of the most unexplainable mysteries of the modern era as far as intention goes. Granted, I will admit that the Dyatlov Pass incident may not necessarily be explained by an act of the occult, the most likely explanation being a logical yet tragically coincidental accident, but you've got to admit, the red flags are there. On January 25th, 1959, 9 Russian students set out on a journey across the Otorten mountain range, nestled deep in the northern Urals. They would never be seen alive again. Their tent was originally found by a search party after they'd been missing for over a month. It was found on the uppermost slope of Kholat Syakhl, or Mountain of the Dead in the native language of northern Siberia. All 9 of the students were seasoned hikers and skiers, yet the scene told a different story. Their bodies were found scattered in various bizarre spots around the tent's location. Some of them had burrowed up to 15 feet beneath the snow. Most of them were naked with a string of bewildering anomalies. One of them, Lyudmila Dubinia, was missing her tongue and eyes. Others had broken bones and massive internal trauma, but perplexingly, no external injuries, not even a scratch. Whatever happened on the Mountain of the Dead remains shrouded in mystery. Coming in next at number 4, the San Francisco Satanic beheading. On the 8th of February 1989, a homeless man, Leroy Carter Jr., was sleeping rough in the Golden Gate Park of San Francisco. That night, he was brutally attacked and murdered. After the authorities arrived on the scene the next morning, they discovered that his head had been cut off. Not only that, but it was nowhere to be found. They scoured the crime scene, but it had appeared that the head was missing. Bizarrely, perhaps the only clue at the crime scene was a headless chicken, which had been partly stuffed into Leroy Carter Jr.'s neck. The San Francisco police were baffled. They called in a specialist, Officer Sandy Gallant, who had built her career around occult crimes. From the beginning, she realized that the murder was perhaps related to a ritual involved in Palo Mayombe, a black magic offshoot of the religion Santeria. Their intention was to make a ritualized brew from Leroy Carter's brain. Strangely enough though, she also predicted that the head would be returned to the crime scene after 42 days, in completion of the ritual. Well, lo and behold, right on schedule, the head was returned exactly 42 days later. However, no one had taken Officer Sandy Gallant seriously, and no one was watching the crime scene to make an arrest. The ritualistic murderer escaped justice, and the case remains unsolved to this day.
Up next at 3, the Dyatlov Pass incident. Back in 1959, a group of 10 young hikers went on a skiing expedition across the northern Urals of the then Soviet Union. Consisting mainly of students in their early 20s, 9 9 of them were later found dead, and the cause of their deaths have never been identified. Based on evidence found, the incident that caused their deaths occurred between February 1st and 2nd. Here's what we know thanks to diaries and camera footage. The group of 10 set out in the early hours of January 25th to a village that was the last inhabited settlement to the north of their destination. On the 28th, one of their members, the only survivor of the group, was suffering from health conditions pertaining to his heart, so he was forced to stay behind. The other 9 continued, and on the 31st they arrived at the edge of a highland area where they began to prepare to climb the nearby slopes. On the 1st, they had started to move across the pass with the intention of camping out on the other side, but the weather conditions worsened, with snowstorms and poor visibility becoming an issue. They chose to camp out on the slope, not wanting to lose the altitude that they had already gained. Prior to their departure, the group's leader had told their sports club that they would send a telegram upon their return, roughly around February 12th. The telegram never came. On February 20th, the rescue operation began, and on the 26th, the group's abandoned tent was discovered. According to one of the searchers, the tent was half torn down and covered in snow. It was empty, and all the group's belongings and shoes had been left behind. Footprints were found, implying that some were barefoot or in socks, and the prints led down to the nearby woods. This is where they found the first bodies, who were only dressed in their underwear. Other bodies were found nearby, and it appeared as if some of them had tried to climb a nearby tree in panic. It gets weirder too. According to the journalist reporting on the findings, 6 members of the group died from hypothermia, while 3 died of fatal injuries, including skull damage and chest fractures. The tent had been ripped from within. There were no indications of other people near the pass except for them. Based on the evidence, the group had left the campsite on their own accord, and the theory that the indigenous people who lived nearby may have attacked them was debunked due to a doctor's report, which stated that the fatal injuries found on those 3 members could not have been from another human, stating, I quote, "because the force of the blows had been too strong and no soft tissue had been damaged." The area is now known as the Dyatlov Pass, named after the leader of the expedition in memorial. In at number 2, Roanoke. The name Roanoke might ring a bell to some horror fans out there. The Roanoke Colony, also known as the Lost Colony, was the basis for a season of the hit TV show American Horror Story. The actual colony, though, was an English settlement established in 1585 on Roanoke Island, which today is Dare County in North Carolina. When the colony was first established, they ran into issues due to a lack of supplies and bad relations with local tribes of Native Americans, one of which was the nearby Croatoan tribe on the Haratas Island. Many of the individuals from the colony left to return back to England a year afterwards because of this, but a small group of people was left behind. By the time a second expedition, led by the colony's governor, arrived to Roanoke in 1587, all of that small detachment had completely disappeared. Shortly afterwards that year, the governor left to return to England to ask the government for assistance, and eventually returned back in August of 1590, only to discover that the entire colony was now missing. The only clue left behind was the word Croatoan carved into a tree. It's commonly believed that the settlers were killed off by the Croatoan tribe, but no bodies were ever discovered. Another theory is due to bad weather conditions, the settlers were forced to take shelter with local tribes, but no conclusive evidence can support that theory either. So where did they go? What happened to the 90 men, 11 women, and 11 children that were settlers there? Well, we may never know, but it's probably not what American Horror Story thought happened. And finally, in at number 1, Alisa Lam. The mystery of Alisa Lam is one that just doesn't add up. It's also an incredibly recent case, occurring in 2013. Alisa Lam, a student at the University of British Columbia, was discovered inside of a water tank located above the Cecil Hotel in downtown LA. She had been reported to be missing at the beginning of that month, and had only been discovered when maintenance workers at the hotel opened up the tank, after hotel guests complained about problems with the water supply. It gets weirder too. Footage of Alisa inside the hotel's elevator revealed strange behavior from the student. Whenever the elevator doors would open, she would look outside of them, and kept herself tucked into one of the elevator's corners, as if she was hiding. She was also known to have bipolar disorder, and the security camera also revealed that the elevator appeared to be suffering from malfunctions. Alisa leaving the elevator is the last known sighting of her. There was no evidence found concerning how exactly she got inside the water tank either. Doors to the roof of the building were locked, with only staff having the passcodes and keys, and no alarm was ever triggered, although it was noted that the roof was also accessible by the fire escape. It's also questionable how she would have gone inside the water tank on her own, since the lids are quite heavy and required a ladder to access. There was also no trace of her on the roof afterwards, and she was found naked inside the tank with most of her clothes and other personal effects floating in the water beside her. Now, the most common theory is that she was being pursued by someone, or believed that she was being pursued by someone, and had tried to hide in the water tank to escape them, but got trapped within. Some have noted that the mystery of her death shares similarities with the 2005 horror film Dark Water, and the film that it was a remake of, the 1996 Japanese movie of the same name.
Number 5. D.B. Cooper. One of the most infamous disappearance cases in history, and I'm gonna be honest, probably my personal favorite unsolved mystery of all time. If you haven't heard the story of the real-life daredevil heister, Mr. D.B. Cooper, you're in for a treat and then some. Depending on your definition of success, you could argue DB Cooper might be the most successful criminal in history, since not only did he get off with quite an impressive take, but he got away with all his crimes and avoided capture, if he's still alive, that is. On November 24th, 1971, a man using an alias of Dan Cooper walked up to the ticket counter at Portland International and booked a one-way ticket to Seattle, claiming that he was on business. He was technically correct in that assessment. Once on board the plane, Cooper passed a note to a flight attendant, and he was not asking for an extra bag of peanuts and fluffing his pillow. No, he was just letting the attendant know that he had brought a bomb on board the flight and demanded $200,000 and 4 parachutes. And if he caught a whiff of any funny business, he'd turn this plane into a national tragedy on the 6 o'clock news, see? So, you know, nothing unreasonable really. I make all those demands whenever I'm hangry, pretty normal stuff. So the plane landed in Seattle, as originally planned, and authorities were summoned to deliver the ransom money and parachutes to Cooper. The passengers were relieved and eventually let go, but the flight crew was stuck with their new boss, Mr. Cooper, who'd taken them hostage. Cooper seized the plane, planning a flight path to Mexico City, but midway through the flight, Cooper, who was a huge fan of the film Point Break and wanted to pay homage to it, jumped out of a plane with all of the money. DB Cooper jumping out of that plane with a suitcase full of money would be the last time anyone ever saw him. He jumped out of that plane and into the stuff of history book legends, the Hall of Fame of heisters. Move over, Payday Crew, this guy's got you beat. Despite extensive searching, not a hair of DB Cooper ever turned up. Some speculate rather bluntly that perhaps he miscalculated the angle and splattered somewhere across the northwest and the heist wasn't as impressive as we thought, while others imagine that he got off easy, he's knocking back Mai Tais on a Hawaiian island, enjoying the spoils of his loot. But who was the guy to begin with? A career crook on one last job? Someone trying it out? Someone snapping? Several theories suggest he was ex-military, special forces, which would explain his proficiency. In fact, the leading hypothesis is that he was ex-military. We may never know who the real DB Cooper is, and that's fine. That's the way he'd want it. And if we don't know who he is, it makes it that much more fun for us. He could be any one of us. He could be you, he could be me, he could be... I'll stop talking there. And if you're looking for more scary videos and strange stories out there, we've got all of that and then some. If you can think it up, we've probably done a video or 2 on it. We've got quite the catalog. So click on through, hit subscribe, and please tickle that little bell and make sure you don't miss a single scream. But would you kindly do that at the end of this video? Because I got 4 more missing persons cases ready for you now. Number 4, the Mary Celeste. Our next mysterious case is a bit of an outlier, a little bit of a cheat. I know. It's not just one person going missing, it's an entire ship. How does that happen? December 1872, the captain of the Mary Celeste, one Benjamin Briggs, cast off to New York to travel to Italy for unknown reasons, but probably for the tomatoes. The ship was kept to a rather tight crew. A staff of 8, plus Briggs's wife and daughter, were enough to man the vessel. The voyage seemed like it went pretty well until another vessel, the Del Gratia, came into contact with the Celeste and were chilled at what they'd found when they recovered the ship drifting aimlessly. As rescuers boarded the ship, they were greeted with a maritime mystery to forever haunt them. The ship seemed to be in perfect working order, no signs of damage or distress. Had it not been found freely floating, they'd assumed the ship was just built. Aside from a single lifeboat missing, the ship was in good condition, the holds stocked with food and water. The crew's personal belongings were scattered about. The table was set for a meal, as if the crew had been minutes away from breaking bread. So what happened? What reasonable captain would abandon a perfectly serviceable, well-stocked ship? While reasonable explanations were offered, theories of piracy or mutiny prevailing. Now, the ship being relatively untouched does call into question the notion of piracy, as I don't know how much you know about pirates, but they didn't tend to leave the rum behind if there is any. Any pirate captain worth his salt would have plundered that thing down to the floorboards. And there didn't appear to be any struggle at all, so no forceful evacuation, nobody kicked them off the ship. So with rationale out of the way, we've nowhere left to turn but blind and wild speculation, theories of supernatural supernatural beings, cursed gold, vengeful spirits, sea monsters, Davy Jones. Take your pick of whatever nautical bedtime story you think could have overtaken the Mary Celeste. So you know what? Let me know down below. I love pirate ghost stories more than anything. Perhaps it was a bit of sea madness, cabin fever. Maybe it's whatever happened to those two guys in the lighthouse happened to them here. No matter how you slice it, the vanishing of the Mary Celeste is a head scratcher of a mystery. More lost souls to the darkness that lurks below the ocean's water. Wary yourselves against the whispers that echo the seas, for the spirits of the Mary Celeste may still be watching, eager to claim another.
Next up at number 3, Pauline Picard. And this story is crazy, and we're going all the way back to April 1922 in the rural area of Brittany, France. On one fateful day, little Pauline Picard, who was just 2 years old at the time, disappeared from her family's farm. No one had seen her wander off, and seemingly she had vanished without a trace. All search parties failed to find her, yet strangely enough, a few days later, local police received news that a little girl who matched exactly the description of Pauline Picard had been found alone wandering around the town of Cherbourg, which was over 300 kilometers away. Pauline's mother identified her via photograph, and the police were satisfied that it was the same girl. I know, right? This case is absolutely insane, but hold on, because it gets weirder. Because about a month later, a farmer that was walking near the Picard farm stumbled upon the last thing that anybody expected to find. It was the mutilated and decomposing body of a young girl, perhaps 2 years old. Next to her was a pile of neatly folded clothes. When the townspeople arrived, Pauline's parents included, they discovered that the folded clothes were the exact same ones that Pauline had been wearing on the day that she disappeared. It was thought by police that the body had been deliberately placed. The crime scene was pristine. Even weirder though, I told you guys, was the fact that the skull of an adult male had been placed next to the body. If that was Pauline's body, then who was the other kid? What happened to Pauline? And what the hell is going on with that mysterious skull? Well, no one knows, and the strange case of little Pauline Picard remains France's greatest unsolved mystery. Swinging in next at number 2, Janette Deparma. On the chilly afternoon of Monday, August 7th, 1972, 16-year-old Janette Deparma left her house in Springfield Township, New Jersey, to meet a friend, let her mother know that she was taking the train on the way. She was never seen alive again. After her disappearance, her parents filed a missing person report with the Springfield police, but the case went cold. That is until 6 weeks later, on September 19th, when the skeletal remains of Janette Deparma were found at the top of Springfield's Hoodale Quarry. This is where things get weird and raises the question of a potential fault in the police investigation. According to several witnesses, her remains were surrounded by a pattern of strange occultist objects, adorned into a coffin-shaped parameter of wicker branches and small wooden makeshift symbols. It is claimed by some residents of Springfield that this pattern was in actual fact a pentagram. Janette Deparma's autopsy did not reveal a cause of death, although the coroner suspected strangulation. Even more bizarrely were the high amounts of lead found in her body, yet no explanation for this was given either. Eventually the case went cold, and the tragic murder of Janette Deparma remains a mystery to this day. And finally, at our number 1 spot, Bella in the Wych Elm. Who put Bella down the Wych Elm is a common question asked in the West Midlands area of Hagley near Birmingham. I've seen it myself, often written in scrawling graffiti on brick walls. It's a mystery that has perplexed the Midlands for over half a century, yet still remains to be answered. On April the 18th, 1943, 4 young boys went poaching in the woods of the Hagley Hall estate, thinking they'd find some bird nests ripe for picking. After climbing a wych elm tree, the then 15-year-old Bob Farmer made a much more gruesome discovery. Inside the hollow opening of the tree's trunk, wedged tightly inside, were the skeletal remains of a woman, entirely complete save for one missing hand. Police were dispatched to the scene and found it exactly as described. Later, buried near the tree, they found the woman's severed hand along with several items of clothing believed to belong to her. Locals dubbed her Bella, and rumours stirred of a witch's coven, black magic and occultist execution. Police investigation later discovered that the woman, who was believed to be between 35 and 40, had been placed into the tree's hollow while still warm, where she had remained hidden for at least 18 months. Nothing else is known about Bella and how she ended up in the Wych Elm, and it remains one of England's most terrifying occult mysteries. Kicking off at number 5, Coral Castle. And no, that is not my imitation of Rick Grimes trying to call his son a fortified structure. Sorry, that was a terrible joke. But the actual mystery of Coral Castle is equal parts true engineering enigma and equal parts perhaps the most American thing that you've ever heard of. Along the highways and byways of rural America, there are countless tourist attractions that litter the way, but one of them in particular may actually have a much more intriguing mystery than the rest. Just before 1920, a Latvian man named Edward Leedskalnin was jilted by his young bride just a day before their wedding, and so dejected and depressed, Edward left his home country to head to America. Here, after becoming a recluse and discovering a strange affinity for magnetism, Edward spent the next 28 years constructing a bizarre megalithic castle from oolite, a limestone sediment similar to coral. Now, although the vast majority of this structure now is ruinous, which operates as a popular tourist attraction on the roadside, the actual structural properties of Coral Castle have baffled people for decades. Given the fact that Leedskalnin worked completely alone, shifting over 1,000 tons of oolite rock into place with no conventional machinery and no other means of hauling such a large amount of minerals and materials. As the legend goes, at one point a few local teenagers claimed to have stumbled upon Leedskalnin working on the structure late at night, reporting that he had caused the blocks of coral to move like hydrogen balloons, floating perfectly into place without the aid of any tools. Strangely enough, this led to wild rumours that Leedskalnin was using telekinesis to build the castle, a claim which he refuted. In fact, the only tool that Leedskalnin ever spoke of using was a machine that he referred to as a perpetual motion holder. Before his death, whenever he was asked how he constructed the place, he simply stated that he understood the laws of weight and leverage well, and on several occasions he stated publicly that he had discovered the secrets of the pyramids, and that once you know how to do it, it's easy. I mean, this one is a little tongue-in-cheek, but what do you guys think? Another eccentric recluse with too much time on his hands, or a structural genius that had insight into a long-forgotten knowledge? Let me know. Coming in at number 4, Kaspar Hauser. And who the hell was Kaspar Hauser? A mystery that has completely perplexed historians for nearly 2 centuries, leading to an insane web of speculation, an entire network of conspiracy that extends its tendrils all the way to the royalty of Napoleon. On the 26th of May 1828, a teenage boy appeared on the streets of Nuremberg, Germany. His name was Kaspar, a boy of 16. He was filthy, could speak only a few words, and had a letter with him addressed to a captain of the Bavarian cavalry. He kept repeating the phrase, "I want to be a cavalryman as my father was," in Old Bavarian, but the city guard dismissed his ramblings and imprisoned him as just another vagabond in Nuremberg Castle. His strange origin drew the attention of the city's mayor, who claimed that despite his stunted appearance, the boy had an excellent memory and was quick to learn. Eventually, after befriending the mayor, Kaspar spoke of what he could remember of his life before, and explained in great detail at living totally alone in a darkened cell 2 meters long, 1 meter wide. Each morning, Kaspar said, he would wake to find rye bread and water next to his bed. Periodically, he said the water would taste bitter, and after drinking it, he would sleep more heavily than usual, where he'd wake up to find his hair and his nails had been cut. Kaspar claimed that the first human he had contact with was a mysterious man dressed in a dark hood, his face completely covered. He taught him to write his name and taught him the same phrase he would repeat when he was found. Eventually, this story led the European aristocracy to believe that Kaspar was an exiled prince, held captive for his entire life to prevent a line of succession. As the year passed, Kaspar would live and learn in many of the Bavarian noble houses, where allegedly there were many attempts on his life by the same hooded men that he had described in the darkened cell. They got him in the end though, and on the 14th of December 1833 he was mysteriously stabbed and he died 3 days later. On his grave in Latin read the words, "Here lies a mysterious one who was killed in a mysterious manner." Beats me.
Number 3. Frederick Valentic. Our next mysterious case is Frederick Valentic, an Australian pilot, a well-trained aerial ace. He had 150 hours of manned flight experience and was permitted to fly alone, provided it was in good weather conditions. He also had a love of extraterrestrial life, a deep desire to find that unknown above. Well, Valentic might have got his wish. Tragically, it might have cost him his life. The year was 1978. Frederick Valentich was performing a 125 nautical mile training flight flying to a small landmass called Kings Island. While at 4,500 feet in the air, Valentich thought he had seen something with him. The Melbourne Flight Service insisted that there wasn't anything in the air with him, but Frederick radioed back and said that there was something on his tail. He claimed that he saw something glowing with 4 repeating bright lights and was rushing past him, and he described it as shiny, metallic, and chrome and looking like a small manned craft. Now, unsure what was happening, Valentich on radio to ground control told them that he was experiencing engine troubles inexplicably. Could this strange flying object be the source of these unexpected problems? Valentich complained out about whatever was following him to the Melbourne Flight Service, saying, "It's hovering and it's not an aircraft." Those would be the last words anyone ever heard from Frederick. Minutes after that last transmission, he went silent and the plane, or the mysterious craft, was never found. An intense search revealed nothing. No sign of the man. The only lead was a local farmer alleging that the day Frederick disappeared, he saw what looked like a civilian aircraft seemingly fused with what looked like a saucer. The farmer told authorities he was worried about being dismissed as a crackpot, so he didn't tell anyone what he saw that day. What do you think? Should he have checked his eyes better? Or was he perhaps the last person to see the remnant of Frederick Valentich before he was carried off into who knows what? Number 2. Michael Rockefeller. When Michael Rockefeller was born, he was born with a silver spoon to a lineage of millionaires in the late 1930s. His great-grandfather, one John Rockefeller, is one of the richest men to have ever lived. The Rockefellers had hoped that Michael would follow them in the family business. Michael, however, had other ideas and wanted to use his millions of dollars to goof off and take it easy, which is what most of us would, I think. Michael had wanderlust in his heart and a deep interest in anthropology, specifically focused on Nigerian, Mayan, and Aztec cultures. Michael's father sat on a board of a museum in New York where Michael would discover this passion, hoping to one day open a collection of indigenous art in New York. After some discussions with the Dutch Museum of Ethnology, terrible name, Michael had decided he would set out to the massive island off the coast of Australia, at the time known as Dutch New Guinea. In 1961, he set off to collect the art of the Asmat people who lived there. It would be a one-way trip. The Asmat people that he was going to study were very disconnected from the rest of the world. They had previously seen Dutch colonizers, but otherwise they weren't getting a ton of visitors. The Asmat believed that the land beyond their island was inhabited by spirits, and they saw the Euros and the Americans as supernatural beings that had come over from across the sea. Michael and his team were allowed to study the people, but were banned from purchasing or taking anything, which held a great deal of significance to the Asmat. Nonetheless, Michael was thrilled with everything he'd been finding and could not wait to open his exhibit. In November 1961, Michael was on a boat accompanied by other anthropologists when a sudden squall threw the boat off its course. 12 miles away from the shore, but Michael insisted he could swim for it, and he was never seen again. The Rockefellers would spend the next few months spending a small fortune trying to find Michael, but gave up after never uncovering anything. The case went cold for years, but officers believed that Michael hadn't been lost to the water, but was rather offered as part of a sacrifice. His head chopped off, his flesh eaten, his bones made into weaponry, you know. Fun stuff. An investigator, one Carl Hoffman, uncovered this while filming the Asmat people. He saw a group of men acting out a scene, miming the act of, removing someone's head from the rest of their neck and attacking them with spears. Now, we can't really find this footage, but through interpretation and translation was a stern warning to the other villagers that Hoffman reported. Pop your ears open and take a listen. Don't you tell this story to any other man. I hope you remember it, and you must keep this for us. I hope this is for you and you only. Don't talk to anyone, to other people, or another village. If people question you, don't answer. Don't talk to them because the story is only for you. If you tell it to them, you'll die. Or any other village because the story is only for us. I probably shouldn't have shared it just then, now. Maybe just scrub that. Number 1, Lars Mittank. Lars Mittank is a young German man who became infamous in 2014 when his disappearance captured the attention of the world. Last seen on airport security footage, he's been called the most famous missing person on YouTube. Wow, isn't that a lovely title? I'd put that right on my resume. In July 2014, Mittank was vacationing in Varna, Bulgaria, I've heard lovely things, with a group of friends. Apparently things were pretty unremarkable until an argument about football at a bar turned into a brawl. You see, Mittank was a Bremen man and he was getting into an argument with some nasty Bayern fans. I actually don't know nothing about German football. Clear that up in the comments. Mittank would suffer a ruptured eardrum eardrum and was told to stay on the ground, for flying could damage his ears even further. So Lars decided to stay in Varna just a little bit longer while the rest of the party would return back to Berlin. Now here's where things take a turn for the strange. CCTV footage from the airport shows Lars behaving strangely, for lack of a better word. Dropping his luggage, running in a sprint, hopping a fence, the kind of things you would do if you were running away from somebody. His final texts warned his mother to cancel his credit cards as he believed he was being pursued. This footage was the last time he was ever seen, as he vanished without a trace shortly thereafter. Both German and Bulgarian authorities launched investigations, but nobody found anything. Hospital records turned up nothing, and outside of a few disconnected sightings of alleged hitchhikers which could have matched descriptions, nothing was ever outright confirmed. So what happened? What happened? There are theories. Some speculate perhaps that the medication he was prescribed was causing a psychological breakdown, combined with the paranoia of being attacked and reeling from the attack earlier in the week. The doctor who prescribed that medication, though, noted he never even filed the prescription, and the doctor was perplexed and concerned with the seemingly causeless change of behavior.